The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls of Thornfield Palace like secrets waiting to be whispered. Captain Marcus Webb adjusted his crimson uniform jacket as he made his rounds through the East Wing corridors. 20 years of service to the Crown had taught him that silence in these halls often meant trouble was brewing somewhere in the shadows. His polished boots echoed against the marble floors as he passed beneath portraits of long-dead monarchs whose painted eyes seemed to follow his every step. The palace was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning. Even the servants who normally bustled about their morning duties were nowhere to be seen in this particular section of the palace. Marcus had earned his position through dedication and an unwavering loyalty that had been tested countless times. He had served under 3 different monarchs and had witnessed palace intrigue that would make seasoned diplomats lose sleep. But something about today felt different. There was an electric tension in the air that made the fine hairs on the back of his neck stand at attention. As he rounded the corner near the Queen Consort's private chambers, his sharp eyes caught something that made him pause mid-step. There, on the pristine marble floor, lay a small white object that seemed completely out of place in the immaculately maintained corridor. Marcus approached cautiously, his training telling him that even the smallest detail could be significant in palace security. Bending down, he picked up what appeared to be a hospital identification bracelet. The plastic was still white and clean, suggesting it had not been there long. The name printed on it made his blood run cold. Catherine Elizabeth Windsor, room 247, St. Mary's Hospital. The date showed it was from just 3 days ago. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he examined the bracelet more closely. The Princess of Wales had been conducting public engagements just yesterday, smiling and waving to crowds with no mention of any hospital visit. Yet here was clear evidence that she had been a patient somewhere, and somehow this bracelet had ended up in a corridor that led directly to the Queen Consort's private quarters. The implications began racing through his mind like dominoes falling in sequence. If the princess had been hospitalized and it was being kept secret from the public, there had to be a serious reason. Royal health scares were always handled with extreme discretion, but finding evidence of such a visit in this particular location raised questions that made him deeply uncomfortable. Marcus carefully pocketed the bracelet and continued his patrol, though his mind was no longer focused on routine security checks. He passed by Lady Beatrice Ashworth's study, where he could hear muffled voices engaged in what sounded like an intense discussion. Lady Beatrice served as the Queen Consort's private secretary and closest confidant, a position that gave her access to the most sensitive palace information. Through the slightly open door, he caught fragments of conversation that made him slow his pace without appearing to eavesdrop. "The photographs must never surface," came Lady Beatrice's usually calm voice, now tinged with an urgency he had never heard before. "If anyone discovers what happened at the hospital, it will create a scandal that could destabilize everything we've worked to build." Another voice, one he recognized as belonging to Dr. Margaret Thornton, the royal family's private physician, responded with equal gravity. "The medical records have been sealed, but we cannot control every piece of evidence. Hospital staff talk, and there were too many witnesses to what occurred during her stay." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he processed what he was hearing. The hospital bracelet in his pocket suddenly felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. Whatever had happened during the princess's secret hospital visit was significant enough to require a cover-up at the highest levels. He forced himself to continue walking, knowing that lingering would raise suspicion if anyone noticed. But as he made his way toward the main staircase, his mind was already formulating plans. 20 years of loyal service had taught him when to look the other way and when to pay attention. This was definitely a situation that required his full attention. The palace hierarchy was a delicate ecosystem where information was currency and secrets were weapons. Marcus had always prided himself on staying above the political machinations that swirled around royal family members like sharks circling wounded prey. But finding that hospital bracelet had thrust him into the center of something that could have far-reaching consequences. As he descended the grand staircase, he noticed Queen Consort Isabella standing near the large windows that overlooked the palace gardens. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her usually perfect posture, Her hands were clasped tightly behind her back, and she stared out at the manicured lawns with an intensity that suggested her thoughts were far from the peaceful garden scene. Isabella had always been a complex figure within the palace walls. Beautiful, intelligent, and politically astute, she had navigated her way into her current position through a combination of charm, strategic thinking, and an almost ruthless determination to secure her place in the royal hierarchy. But she was also known for her volatile temper when she felt threatened or cornered. Marcus had witnessed several instances over the years where Isabella's carefully constructed public persona had cracked to reveal a woman who would do whatever was necessary to protect her interests. The thought of what she might do if she discovered he had found evidence of whatever secret was being hidden made his stomach tighten with apprehension. He decided to alter his usual patrol route to avoid passing too close to where she stood. But as he turned toward the West Wing, he nearly collided with James Whitmore, the palace's head of communications. James looked harried and stressed, clutching a thick folder of papers against his chest like a shield. "Captain Webb?" James said, his voice strained with barely contained panic. "Have you noticed anything unusual this morning? Any irregularities in the corridors or unexpected items that might have been dropped?" The question was too specific to be coincidental. Marcus felt the hospital bracelet in his pocket like a lead weight as he maintained his composure. "Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. Is there something specific I should be looking for?" James studied his face intently for a moment before shaking his head. "Just keep your eyes open. There are sensitive matters being handled today that require absolute discretion. If you notice anything that seems out of place, please report it immediately to Lady Beatrice or myself." After James hurried away, Marcus stood alone in the corridor, feeling the weight of the decision that lay before him. He could turn in the bracelet and claim he had just found it, playing the role of the dutiful guard following protocol. Or he could investigate further and try to understand what was really happening behind the palace's carefully maintained facade. The sound of approaching footsteps made him straighten and resume his patrol. Princess Catherine herself rounded the corner, looking radiant and healthy in a powder blue dress that complemented her famous smile. She nodded graciously as she passed, showing no signs of having been recently hospitalized. But Marcus noticed she wore long sleeves despite the warm weather, and there was something in her eyes that suggested she was working harder than usual to maintain her composed demeanor. As the princess disappeared around the corner, Marcus made his decision. 20 years of loyalty to the crown meant loyalty to the truth, not to cover-ups that could potentially harm the very institution he had sworn to protect. He would investigate discreetly, following the evidence wherever it might lead. The rest of his morning patrol passed in a blur of routine checks and growing anxiety. Every conversation he overheard seemed to contain hidden meanings. Every glance between staff members felt loaded with significance. The palace, which had always felt like a second home to him, now seemed like a maze of secrets and potential dangers. By the time he returned to his quarters for lunch, Marcus had formulated a plan. He would use his access to palace security systems to review the footage from the corridors over the past few days. If the bracelet had been dropped recently, there might be video evidence of who was carrying it and why they were in that particular area of the palace. But as he settled down with a simple meal of bread and cheese, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something that would change his life forever. The hospital bracelet sat on his desk like a ticking bomb, and he had the uncomfortable sensation that time was running out before the explosion would tear through the carefully constructed world of palace politics. The afternoon sun streamed through his small window, casting long shadows across the room. In a few hours, he would begin his evening rounds, and he suspected that by tomorrow morning, nothing in the palace would ever be quite the same again. The question that haunted him as he prepared to delve deeper into the mystery was whether he would survive the truth he was about to uncover. As clouds began to gather outside his window, Marcus couldn't help but think they were an ominous portent of the storm that was about to break over Thornfield Palace. The bracelet seemed to pulse with secrets, and he knew that once he began pulling at this particular thread, the entire fabric of palace life might begin to unravel in ways no one could predict or control. The security monitoring room in the basement of Thornfield Palace hummed with the quiet efficiency of modern surveillance technology. Captain Marcus Webb had waited until the evening shift change to access the video archives, knowing that fewer people would be around to question his presence. The room's bank of monitors cast an eerie blue glow across his weathered face, as he scrolled through hours of corridor footage. Marcus had told the duty officer that he was conducting a routine security review, which was technically true, though he omitted the specific nature of what he was searching for. The hospital bracelet lay on the desk beside the keyboard, a constant reminder of the mystery he was trying to solve. The timestamp showed 3 days ago, the same date that appeared on the bracelet. Marcus focused his attention on the camera that covered the corridor where he had found the evidence. For the first several hours, the footage showed only the usual parade of palace staff going about their duties. Then, at 2:47 a.m., something caught his attention. A figure in dark clothing moved quickly down the corridor, staying close to the shadows along the wall. The person seemed to know exactly where the security cameras were positioned, taking care to keep their face turned away from direct view. But their body language suggested urgency, almost desperation. Marcus enhanced the image as much as the system would allow, but the figure remained frustratingly anonymous. However, he could see that the person was carrying something small in their right hand. The object was too small to make out clearly, but its size and shape were consistent with a hospital bracelet. As he continued watching, the figure stopped directly in front of Queen Consort Isabella's private chambers. They appeared to be listening at the door, then pulled out what looked like a key, but instead of entering, they seemed to change their mind and hurried away, disappearing around the corner toward the main staircase. The timestamp showed that only 7 minutes later the same figure returned, moving even more frantically than before. This time they dropped something small on the floor before fleeing the scene entirely. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he realized he was watching the moment when the hospital bracelet had been lost, but the identity of the mysterious figure remained a puzzle. The dark clothing and careful positioning made it impossible to determine if it was male or female, staff member or family member. What was clear, however, was that whoever it was had access to areas of the palace that required high-level security clearance. Marcus saved the video footage to a secure drive and began cross-referencing the timestamp with other cameras throughout the palace. If he could track the person's movement patterns, he might be able to identify them through process of elimination. The trail led him through a maze of corridors and stairwells, but the figure's knowledge of camera blind spots was impressive. They moved through the palace like someone intimately familiar with its layout and security systems. This suggested either a long-term staff member or someone with access to detailed security information. As he worked late into the night, Marcus began to notice patterns in the palace's evening activities that he had never paid attention to before. Certain staff members had access to areas during off hours that seemed unusual for their official positions. There were meetings happening in private chambers long after normal business hours, and communication patterns that suggested coordination between people who normally had little contact with each other. Around midnight, as he was preparing to conclude his investigation for the evening, Marcus heard footsteps in the corridor outside the monitoring room. This was unusual, as the security area was typically deserted at this hour, except for the skeleton crew manning the central console. The footsteps paused directly outside the monitoring room door, and Marcus quickly minimized the video windows he had been studying. A moment later, the door opened to reveal Lady Beatrice Ashworth looking completely out of place in the technical environment of the security center. "Captain Webb," she said, her voice carrying its usual authoritative tone despite the late hour. "I'm surprised to find you here so late. Is there a security concern that requires immediate attention?" "Routine review of the monitoring systems, my lady. I prefer to conduct these checks when there's minimal foot traffic to interfere with the analysis." Lady Beatrice stepped further into the room, her sharp eyes taking in the multiple monitors and the enhanced security footage still visible on one of the screens. "And have you discovered anything noteworthy during your analysis?" The question felt loaded with implications that made Marcus's guard go up immediately. "Nothing beyond the usual patterns of palace activity, my lady. Though I must say there seems to be more movement in the private quarters during evening hours than I had previously realized." A flash of something that might have been concern crossed Lady Beatrice's face before her expression returned to its usual composed mask. "The royal family maintains active schedules that often extend well into the evening. Private meetings and correspondence frequently require attention during quieter hours." Marcus nodded, accepting the explanation while filing away her defensiveness for later consideration. "Of course, my lady. I was merely making note of the patterns for future security planning." Lady Beatrice lingered in the room longer than seemed necessary, Her attention apparently focused on the bank of monitors showing current feeds from throughout the palace, but Marcus had the distinct impression she was really studying him, trying to determine how much he might have discovered during his evening's work. "Captain Webb," she said finally, "I trust that your security reviews remain confidential unless there are specific threats that require immediate action. The privacy of the royal family is, of course, paramount in all security considerations." The warning was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus straightened to attention and nodded formally. "Absolutely, my lady. Discretion has always been a cornerstone of palace security protocols." After Lady Beatrice departed, Marcus sat alone in the monitoring room, feeling more convinced than ever that he had stumbled onto something significant. Her unexpected appearance in the security area at midnight, combined with her pointed questions about his investigation, suggested that people in high positions were very concerned about what information might surface. He carefully erased the digital trail of his evening's research, knowing that others with access to the security systems might check on his activities. But he had already copied the crucial footage to his personal drive, and his memory had cataloged every detail of what he had observed. The next morning brought news that made Marcus's blood run cold. Princess Catherine had announced a sudden departure for an extended private retreat at a remote royal estate in Scotland. The official explanation cited her need for rest and reflection, but the timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. During his morning rounds, Marcus noticed increased activity in the Queen Consort's wing. Staff members moved with unusual urgency, and there were several visitors who arrived through private entrances typically reserved for the most sensitive meetings. The atmosphere throughout the palace felt charged with tension that everyone could sense, but no one dared to discuss openly. As he passed by the corridor where he had found the hospital bracelet, Marcus noticed that the area had been deep cleaned overnight. The marble floors gleamed with fresh polish, and even the air seemed different, as if someone had been determined to eliminate any trace evidence that might have been missed. His contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Edmund Hartwell, the palace's chief of staff, who approached with the measured pace of someone delivering important news. Sir Edmund had served the royal family for over 30 years and had witnessed more palace intrigue than anyone else still in active service. "Captain Webb," Sir Edmund said, his voice carrying the weight of formal authority. "There will be some changes to security protocols effective immediately. Access to the Queen Consort's private wing will be restricted to essential personnel only, and all visits must be pre-approved through my office." Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he realized the implications. "Are there specific security threats that have prompted these changes, sir?" Sir Edmund studied him with eyes that had seen decades of palace politics. "Let's simply say that recent events have highlighted the need for enhanced privacy measures. I trust you understand the importance of implementing these protocols without question or delay." The conversation felt like another warning, though delivered with more diplomatic language than Lady Beatrice had used. Marcus was beginning to understand that he had inadvertently walked into a situation where powerful people were working very hard to control information flow and limit access to potential evidence. Throughout the day, he observed a subtle but systematic effort to alter normal palace routines. Staff schedules were changed, security camera positions were adjusted, and several areas that had previously been accessible were suddenly declared off-limits for maintenance reasons. It was a masterful display of damage control, executed with the kind of precision that only came from experience with crisis management. But despite the impressive coordination of the cover-up effort, Marcus had the advantage of knowing exactly what everyone was trying to hide. The hospital bracelet in his possession was like holding a key to a locked room, and he was beginning to understand that the room contained secrets that could shake the foundation of the royal family's public image. As evening approached, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of returning to his quarters as usual, he would use his security clearance to access areas that would soon be off-limits. If he was going to uncover the full truth behind the mystery, tonight might be his last opportunity to gather the evidence he needed. The palace settled into its evening routine around him, but Marcus knew that beneath the surface, calm, powerful forces were working to ensure that certain secrets would never see the light of day. The question that haunted him as he prepared for what might be the most dangerous night of his career was whether he had the courage to expose the truth, regardless of the personal cost. The hospital bracelet seemed to pulse with hidden knowledge as he slipped it into his pocket one more time. Whatever had happened during Princess Catherine's secret hospital stay was significant enough to justify an elaborate cover-up involving the highest levels of palace authority, and Marcus was about to discover just how far people would go to protect the carefully constructed image of royal perfection from the messy reality of human truth. The clock in Captain Marcus Webb's quarters struck 11 as he prepared for what could be the most crucial night of his 20-year career. The palace had settled into its evening quiet, but Marcus knew that some of its most important secrets moved in the shadows after official hours. Armed with his security clearance and the knowledge gained from the previous night's surveillance footage, he set out to uncover the truth behind the hospital bracelet. His first destination was the Queen Consort's private study, a room that would soon be off-limits according to the new security protocols. Marcus had legitimate access tonight, but tomorrow that access would be restricted. If there were answers to be found in Isabella's personal space, this was his last opportunity to find them. The corridor leading to the study was deserted, illuminated only by the soft glow of ornate wall sconces that had lit these passages for over 2 centuries. Marcus moved with the practiced silence of a professional, his rubber-soled shoes making no sound against the marble floors. Every shadow seemed to hold potential danger. Every corner might conceal someone who would question his presence. As he approached the study door, Marcus noticed it was slightly ajar, which was unusual for such a security-conscious environment. Through the gap, he could see the warm glow of lamplight and hear the soft scratch of pen against paper. Someone was inside, working late into the night. Marcus positioned himself to observe without being detected. Through the narrow opening, he could see Queen Consort Isabella seated at her mahogany desk, surrounded by documents and photographs. Her usually perfect composure was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she looked haggard and desperate as she sorted through what appeared to be medical files. The photographs, scattered across her desk, made Marcus's blood run cold. They showed Princess Catherine in a hospital bed, connected to various medical equipment, looking pale and unconscious, but what truly shocked him were the visible bruises on her arms and face, suggesting that whatever had put her in the hospital had been far from a routine medical procedure. Isabella was methodically burning documents in a small silver bowl, the flames casting dancing shadows across her tense features. Each page that turned to ash represented evidence being systematically destroyed. But her hands were shaking, and Marcus could see tears streaming down her face as she worked. "How did it come to this?" Isabella whispered to herself, her voice breaking with emotion. It was supposed to be a simple conversation, nothing more. She wasn't supposed to fall down the stairs. Marcus felt his world shift as he processed what he was hearing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in a way that made his stomach churn with revulsion. The princess's hospital stay hadn't been planned medical treatment. It had been the result of an incident that someone was desperately trying to cover up. Isabella reached for another photograph, but her hands were trembling so badly that she dropped it. The image fluttered to the floor, landing where Marcus could see it clearly. It showed Princess Catherine at the bottom of a marble staircase, unconscious and bleeding, while Isabella stood at the top looking down in apparent shock. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor made Marcus retreat quickly into a nearby alcove. Dr. Margaret Thornton appeared, moving with the brisk efficiency that had made her the royal family's most trusted physician for over a decade. She entered the study without knocking, clearly expected and welcome. "Isabella, you must stop this. Dr. Brantoff says that," Thornton said firmly as she closed the door behind her. "Destroying evidence will only make things worse if anyone starts asking questions. We've already done everything possible to contain the situation." Isabella looked up with red-rimmed eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and crushing guilt. "Margaret, you didn't see her face when she regained consciousness. She knows what really happened. She knows I pushed her." The admission hung in the air like a physical presence, and Marcus felt his legs go weak. The Queen Consort had deliberately caused Princess Catherine's fall down the stairs, resulting in serious injuries that required secret hospitalization. The hospital bracelet he had found was evidence of a cover-up involving assault on a member of the royal family. Dr. Thornton moved to the desk and began gathering the remaining photographs with practiced efficiency. Catherine understands the delicate position we're all in. She's agreed to maintain the fiction that her injuries were the result of an accidental fall during a private riding accident. The medical records have been sealed, and the hospital staff have signed comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. Isabella stood and moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens where generations of royals had walked and made decisions that shaped the course of history. But what about the bracelet? I tried to destroy all the evidence, but when I went to retrieve it from her room, I panicked. Someone was coming, and I dropped it in the corridor. Marcus's hand instinctively moved to his pocket where the bracelet rested. He was holding the one piece of physical evidence that could expose the entire cover-up. The weight of that responsibility felt overwhelming as he listened to the two women discuss their efforts to hide the truth. Thornton's voice took on a reassuring tone that spoke of long experience with crisis management. The corridor has been thoroughly cleaned, and security footage has been reviewed and edited where necessary. Captain Webb conducted a routine patrol this morning and reported nothing unusual. If the bracelet had been found, we would know about it by now. The irony of the situation was not lost on Marcus as he realized that his reputation for trustworthiness was being used to provide false reassurance to the very people he was investigating. His 20 years of loyal service had created a level of trust that they believed would prevent him from becoming a threat to their cover-up. Isabella returned to her desk and picked up a final document, holding it up for Dr. Thornton to see. These are the real medical notes from her treatment. They clearly indicate the nature of her injuries and raise questions about how they occurred. If these ever surface, Dr. Thornton took the document and fed it to the flames without hesitation. They won't surface because they no longer exist. Isabella, you must understand that what happened was a tragic accident born from a moment of passion. Catherine had just announced her intention to speak publicly about certain family matters that would have been extremely damaging to your position and the monarchy itself. Marcus realized that there were layers to this story that went deeper than a simple assault. Whatever Princess Catherine had threatened to reveal must have been significant enough to drive Isabella to violence. The political implications of such a revelation could indeed destabilize the carefully maintained public image of royal family unity. The conversation continued, revealing details that painted a picture of a royal family torn by internal conflicts and competing interests. Princess Catherine had apparently discovered information about Isabella's past that could have destroyed her marriage and her position within the royal hierarchy. The confrontation between the two women had escalated until Isabella, in a moment of rage and desperation, had pushed Catherine down the marble staircase. As Marcus listened, he began to understand the full scope of the conspiracy he had uncovered. It wasn't just about covering up an assault, it was about protecting the entire institution of the monarchy from a scandal that could have far-reaching consequences. The people involved weren't just criminals hiding evidence. They were individuals who believed they were protecting something larger than themselves. But knowing the truth brought with it an impossible moral dilemma. Marcus had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, but that oath had always been understood to mean protecting them from external threats. He had never considered what he would do if the threat came from within the family itself. The sound of chairs being pushed back indicated that the meeting was concluding. Marcus prepared to retreat further into the shadows, but Dr. Thornton's next words froze him in place. What about Captain Webb? His patrol patterns have been unusual lately, and Lady Beatrice mentioned that he was in the security center late last night reviewing footage. Should we be concerned about his activities? Isabella's response chilled Marcus to the bone. Marcus has been absolutely loyal for 20 years. But if he becomes a problem, we'll handle him the same way we've handled all the other obstacles to protecting this family. Some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. The casual way she discussed eliminating him as a potential threat revealed a side of Isabella that Marcus had never seen before. The elegant, refined woman he had protected for years was capable of cold calculation when it came to preserving her position and power. As the two women prepared to leave the study, Marcus realized that his investigation had reached a critical juncture. He possessed evidence that could expose a serious crime, but doing so would destroy institutions and individuals that he had devoted his life to protecting. The hospital bracelet in his pocket had become both a weapon and a burden, and the choice of how to use it would define the rest of his life. The corridor fell silent as Isabella and Dr. Thornton departed, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of terrible knowledge. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the enhanced security protocols took effect, but tonight had revealed truths that would haunt him regardless of what action he chose to take. The palace around him felt different now, transformed from a place of honor and tradition into a stage for deception and cover-up. The very walls seemed to whisper with secrets, and Marcus wondered how many other dark truths were hidden behind the facade of royal perfection. As he made his way back through the corridors toward his quarters, Marcus knew that sleep would not come easily. The hospital bracelet pressed against his leg with each step, a constant reminder that he held the power to either expose the truth or protect the lie. The decision he made in the coming hours would not only determine his own fate, but could alter the course of the monarchy itself. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any burden he had carried in his 20 years of service, and for the first time in his career, Captain Marcus Webb wondered if loyalty to the crown was worth the price of his own soul. Dawn broke gray and stormy over Thornfield Palace, matching Captain Marcus Webb's turbulent state of mind as he stood at his quarters window, watching rain lash against the ancient stones. The hospital bracelet lay on his desk like an accusation, its innocent white plastic containing the power to topple governments and destroy lives. 3 sleepless hours had passed since he returned from overhearing Isabella's confession, and every minute had been consumed by the terrible weight of decision. Marcus understood that he stood at a crossroads where every path led to betrayal. Exposing the truth would destroy the monarchy he had sworn to protect, while remaining silent made him complicit in covering up a serious crime. The irony was not lost on him that 20 years of unwavering loyalty had led to this moment, where loyalty itself had become impossible to define. A sharp knock at his door interrupted his tortured contemplation. Marcus quickly pocketed the bracelet and opened the door to find James Whitmore, the palace communications director, looking even more haggard than he had the previous morning. Behind him stood 2 men in dark suits who radiated the quiet menace of professional security operatives. "Captain Webb," James said, his voice strained with barely controlled tension. "These gentlemen are from the Crown Protection Service. They need to speak with you about some security irregularities that have come to light." The larger of the 2 men stepped forward, his cold eyes assessing Marcus with the clinical efficiency of a predator evaluating potential prey. "Captain Webb, I'm Agent Harrison. We have reason to believe that sensitive information may have been compromised within the palace security structure. We need to conduct a thorough interview in search of your quarters." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but 20 years of military training kept his expression neutral. "Of course, I'm always available to assist with security matters. What specific irregularities are you investigating?" Agent Harrison exchanged a meaningful glance with his partner before responding. "There are indications that classified surveillance footage may have been accessed inappropriately, and certain physical evidence may have been removed from secure areas. We understand you conducted extensive security reviews over the past few days." The net was closing around him, and Marcus realized that his investigation had not been as covert as he had believed. Someone had been monitoring his activities, and now they were moving to neutralize him, before he could become a threat to their carefully constructed cover-up. "I conducted routine security assessments as part of my normal duties," Marcus replied carefully. "All activities were within the scope of my authorized responsibilities." The second agent, a thin man with sharp features, spoke for the first time. "We'll need to examine your computer access logs and conduct a physical search of your quarters. This is a matter of national security, so I trust we can count on your full cooperation." Marcus stepped aside to allow them entry, his mind racing through options that seemed to narrow with each passing moment. The hospital bracelet in his pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric, and he knew that discovery would mean not just the end of his career, but potentially his life, given what he had overheard about handling obstacles. As the agents began their systematic search of his quarters, Marcus maintained the cooperative facade of an innocent man with nothing to hide, but internally, he was calculating distances to exits and evaluating the physical capabilities of his interrogators. Years of combat experience had taught him that sometimes survival required making impossible choices in split seconds. Agent Harrison began examining Marcus's computer while his partner methodically searched drawers and cabinets. The thoroughness of their approach suggested they knew exactly what they were looking for, which meant that somehow his activities had been monitored more closely than he had realized. "Captain Webb," Agent Harrison said without looking up from the computer screen, "we have records showing that you accessed the video surveillance archives at 11:47 p.m. 2 nights ago and remained in the monitoring room until 12:23 a.m. Can you explain the nature of that extended session?
Marcus had prepared for this question during his sleepless night.
I was reviewing camera coverage patterns to identify potential security vulnerabilities. The analysis required examining footage from multiple time periods to establish baseline activity patterns. The agent's partner emerged from searching the bedroom carrying a small digital storage device. This was hidden in a hollowed-out book on his shelf. Shall I connect it to see what files he's been storing? Marcus felt his world begin to collapse as he realized they had found his backup drive containing copies of the surveillance footage. The evidence he had thought was safely hidden would now expose not only his investigation, but also provide them with proof of his knowledge about their cover-up. Agent Harrison's expression shifted from professional inquiry to cold certainty as he examined the contents of the drive. Captain Webb. This device contains unauthorized copies of classified surveillance footage, including enhanced video from the corridor outside the Queen Consort's private chambers. This represents a serious breach of security protocols. The accusations were building into an ironclad case that would justify whatever action they chose to take against him. Marcus realized that he was being systematically isolated and discredited before being eliminated as a threat. The same efficiency that had been used to cover up Isabella's crime was now being turned against him. But as Agent Harrison continued examining the drive, something unexpected happened. The agent's expression changed from triumph to confusion, then to something approaching alarm. He called his partner over and whispered urgently while pointing at the computer screen. Marcus couldn't see what they were viewing, but their reaction suggested that the footage contained something they hadn't expected to find. The enhanced video that had revealed the mysterious figure dropping the hospital bracelet was apparently showing them details that complicated their understanding of the situation. Captain Webb, Agent Harrison said, his voice now carrying a note of uncertainty, "This footage shows an unidentified individual accessing restricted areas during the time period in question. Can you explain how you enhanced the image to this degree of clarity?" Marcus realized that his technical expertise had inadvertently created a problem for the cover-up team. The enhanced footage revealed details that they may not have known existed, potentially exposing aspects of the conspiracy that hadn't been properly addressed in their damage control efforts. "Standard image enhancement protocols," Marcus replied, sensing a shift in the dynamic of the interrogation. "The palace security systems are capable of significant digital enhancement when necessary for threat assessment." The two agents stepped into the hallway for a whispered conference that lasted several tense minutes. Marcus used the time to consider his rapidly diminishing options. The discovery of his investigation materials had confirmed their suspicions, but something in the footage had apparently created new complications for their mission. When they returned, Agent Harrison's demeanor had changed noticeably. The cold certainty had been replaced by something approaching caution, as if he was now uncertain about the best way to proceed. "Captain Webb, we're going to need you to accompany us to a secure facility for extended debriefing. The security implications of your unauthorized investigation require immediate and comprehensive review." Marcus understood that extended debriefing was likely a euphemism for permanent disappearance. He was being given a choice between voluntary cooperation and forced compliance, but either path led to the same destination. The people behind the cover-up had decided that he knew too much to be allowed to live. But as he prepared to accept his fate, the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor made everyone freeze. Lady Beatrice Ashworth appeared in the doorway, flanked by two palace security guards whose loyalties Marcus knew lay with the institutional authority she represented. "Gentlemen," Lady Beatrice said with icy authority, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Captain Webb is needed for immediate consultation on a matter of utmost importance to palace security. Your investigation will need to be postponed until further notice." Agent Harrison stepped forward, his jaw tight with frustrated authority. "Lady Beatrice, this is a Crown Protection Service investigation into serious security breaches. We have clear evidence of unauthorized access to classified materials." Lady Beatrice's smile was razor-sharp as she responded. "And I have direct orders from the highest authority that Captain Webb's expertise is required for a matter that supersedes your investigation. I'm sure you understand the importance of respecting the chain of command." The standoff lasted for several tense moments as competing authorities clashed in the narrow space of Marcus's quarters, but ultimately the agents were forced to defer to Lady Beatrice's institutional power, though their expressions made clear that this was a temporary setback rather than a permanent victory. As the Crown Protection Service agents withdrew, Lady Beatrice turned to Marcus with an expression that mixed calculation with something that might have been genuine concern. "Captain Webb, it seems that your investigative skills have uncovered complications that require careful management. I think it's time we had a frank discussion about the true nature of your discoveries and how they might best serve the interests of the Crown." Marcus realized that he was being offered a different kind of bargain. Instead of elimination, he was being recruited into the conspiracy. The choice was no longer between exposure and silence, it was between becoming complicit in the cover-up or facing the consequences of continued resistance. The hospital bracelet in his pocket seemed to pulse with accusatory weight as he followed Lady Beatrice from his quarters. Whatever conversation awaited him would determine not just his own future but potentially the fate of everyone involved in the conspiracy he had uncovered. The storm outside continued to batter the palace windows as Marcus walked toward what could be either salvation or damnation. The ancient walls around him had witnessed centuries of political intrigue and moral compromise, and he was about to discover whether he would become another casualty of the eternal struggle between truth and power. Behind him, his quarters stood empty except for the lingering sense of violated privacy and the knowledge that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The loyal soldier who had entered this investigation seeking truth was walking toward a conversation that would transform him into something entirely different, assuming he survived to see another dawn. The private meeting room deep within Thornfield Palace felt like a court of judgment as Captain Marcus Webb followed Lady Beatrice Ashworth through its heavy oak doors. The chamber had witnessed centuries of royal decisions that shaped the course of nations, and now it would host a conversation that would determine whether truth or conspiracy would prevail in this particular corner of history. Queen Consort Isabella sat at the head of an ornate table, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the strain she had been under. Dark circles beneath her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and her hands trembled slightly as she gestured for Marcus to take a seat. Dr. Margaret Thornton occupied a chair to her right, while Sir Edmund Hartwell, the Chief of Staff, sat opposite them with the grim expression of a man who had seen too many palace crises. "Captain Webb," Isabella began, her voice carrying none of its usual commanding presence, "it appears that your dedication to palace security has led you into matters that require the most delicate handling. Lady Beatrice has informed me that certain evidence has come to light during your recent investigations." Marcus felt the weight of the hospital bracelet in his pocket as he faced the assembled group of conspirators. Each person in the room represented a different aspect of the institutional power that had been mobilized to cover up Isabella's crime, and he understood that his response would determine not only his own fate but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. "Your Majesty," Marcus replied carefully, "my investigations have indeed revealed information that raises serious questions about recent events within the palace. I believe it's important that all relevant facts be brought to light." Lady Beatrice leaned forward, her expression mixing sympathy with unmistakable warning. "Marcus, we understand that your sense of duty compels you to pursue the truth regardless of consequences. But sometimes the truth serves no constructive purpose and can cause irreparable harm to institutions that serve the greater good." Thornton opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across the table. Marcus could see medical reports, legal opinions, and what appeared to be psychological evaluations, all bearing official seals and signatures. "These documents," Dr. Thornton explained, "represent a comprehensive analysis of the incident involving Princess Catherine. What they reveal is that the situation was far more complex than a simple altercation between family members." Marcus leaned forward to examine the papers, his trained eye quickly identifying discrepancies between what he had witnessed and what the official reports claimed. The medical assessment described Catherine's injuries as consistent with an accidental fall, while the psychological evaluation suggested that she had been under severe emotional distress that might have contributed to carelessness on the staircase. Sir Edmund cleared his throat and spoke with the authority of decades of experience managing royal crises. "Captain Webb, what you must understand is that Princess Catherine had been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to her accident. She had made several threats to reveal confidential family information that would have damaged not just individual reputations, but the stability of the constitutional monarchy itself. Isabella finally spoke, her voice breaking with genuine emotion that seemed impossible to fake. Catherine had discovered certain facts about my past that she threatened to make public, information that would have destroyed my marriage, my position, and potentially brought down the government that depends on royal stability. When I tried to reason with her, she became violent and threatening. The narrative being presented painted a picture dramatically different from what Marcus had overheard the previous night. According to this version, Isabella had acted in self-defense when Catherine became physically aggressive during their confrontation. The fall down the stairs was described as the unfortunate result of Catherine losing her balance during a struggle rather than a deliberate push. Lady Beatrice spread additional documents across the table, including what appeared to be sworn statements from palace staff members who claimed to have witnessed Catherine's erratic behavior in the days before the incident. Security footage timestamps showed her in restricted areas at unusual hours, and communication logs revealed attempts to contact journalists and opposition political figures. "The truth, Captain Webb," Lady Beatrice said solemnly, "is that Catherine was in the midst of what can only be described as a psychological breakdown. Her threats to expose sensitive information were not motivated by any noble desire for transparency, but by a combination of personal resentment and mental instability." Marcus studied the assembled evidence with growing unease. The documentation was comprehensive and professionally prepared, but something about its completeness struck him as suspicious. In his experience, real events left messy trails of contradictory evidence, while manufactured stories tended to be suspiciously consistent and well-organized. Dr. Thornton picked up the narrative thread. When Catherine became physically aggressive during the confrontation with Queen Isabella, the struggle resulted in her tragic fall. The medical evidence supports the conclusion that her injuries were consistent with an accidental fall rather than deliberate violence. Sir Edmund added his perspective with the gravitas of institutional authority. The decision to manage this incident discreetly was made to protect not just the individuals involved, but the broader constitutional framework that depends on public confidence in royal stability. Catherine herself agreed to this approach once she recovered and understood the implications of a public scandal. Marcus realized that he was witnessing a masterful exercise in narrative manipulation. Every piece of evidence supported the official version of events, and every potential contradiction had been anticipated and addressed. The story being presented was internally consistent and legally defensible, even if it bore little resemblance to what he had actually witnessed. But as he examined the psychological evaluation more closely, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The document described Catherine's alleged mental instability in terms that would justify almost any action taken against her. If she were declared mentally incompetent, she could be institutionalized indefinitely, effectively silenced while appearing to receive compassionate medical care. "Where is Princess Catherine now?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the growing alarm he felt. Isabella exchanged glances with Dr. Thornton before responding. "Catherine is receiving specialized care at a private facility in Switzerland. The treatment program is designed to address both her physical recovery and the psychological issues that contributed to the incident. She'll remain there until her doctors determine that she's stable enough to resume public duties." Marcus understood that he was being told Catherine had been effectively imprisoned under the guise of medical treatment. The sophisticated nature of the cover-up included not just hiding the crime, but permanently neutralizing the victim's ability to contradict the official narrative. Lady Beatrice leaned across the table, her expression mixing sympathy with unmistakable threat. "Marcus, you now understand the full complexity of the situation we've been managing. The choice before you is whether to support the stability of the monarchy by accepting the official account of events, or to pursue a course that would destroy institutions and individuals alike while serving no constructive purpose." The hospital bracelet in Marcus's pocket felt like a burning coal as he contemplated the choice being offered. He could accept the conspiracy and become complicit in covering up a serious crime, or he could expose the truth and watch the monarchy collapse under the weight of scandal. Either choice would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sir Edmund produced one final document and placed it before Marcus. "This is a new security assignment that would require your immediate transfer to our embassy in a distant diplomatic post. The position comes with significant compensation and the opportunity to serve your country in a different capacity while allowing the current situation to be resolved without further complications.
Marcus realized he was being offered exile disguised as promotion.
Accepting the transfer would remove him from the palace and any ability to investigate further, while declining would mark him as an ongoing threat that would need to be handled more permanently. But as he stared at the documents spread across the table, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. 20 years of loyal service had taught him that sometimes the greatest loyalty required the greatest sacrifice. He reached into his pocket and placed the hospital bracelet on the table among all the other evidence. "This bracelet tells a different story than your documents," he said quietly. "I found it in the corridor where someone dropped it while fleeing the scene. The security footage shows exactly what happened, and no amount of manufactured evidence can change that truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella stared at the bracelet as if it were a snake that might strike at any moment, while the others realized that their carefully constructed narrative had a flaw they hadn't anticipated. Lady Beatrice was the first to recover her composure. "Marcus, that bracelet proves nothing except that Catherine was indeed hospitalized. It doesn't contradict any aspect of the official account we've shared with you." But Marcus had one more card to play. The enhanced security footage doesn't just show someone dropping the bracelet. It shows Queen Isabella herself fleeing from the scene in a state of panic. The timestamp correlates exactly with when Catherine would have been discovered at the bottom of the stairs. The admission hung in the air like an explosion, and Marcus watched as the faces around the table shifted from confidence to alarm. Their cover-up had been comprehensive, but they had underestimated his technical expertise in enhancing the surveillance footage. Isabella stood slowly, her composure finally cracking completely. "You don't understand what you're destroying, Marcus. This isn't just about one incident or one person. The stability of the entire government depends on maintaining public confidence in the monarchy. If this scandal becomes public, it will bring down everything we've worked to build." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Your Majesty, with respect, some things are more important than political stability. The truth is one of those things." As he spoke those words, Captain Marcus Webb realized that his 20-year career in service to the crown was ending. But for the first time in months, he felt the peace that comes from making the right choice regardless of personal cost. The hospital bracelet sat on the table like a small white monument to the principle that truth, however inconvenient, would always be more important than the lies told to protect it. The storm outside began to clear as the final confrontation played out in the ancient chamber, and Marcus understood that sometimes the greatest loyalty to an institution required exposing its darkest secrets to the cleansing light of truth.